Oh. We are missing a ton of people today.
What?
Who's here? Shelly and Pup.
Were you given like a practice exam? We have exams in our office.
Can I look for them? Or can I?
You gave us a practice exam. And
It's not here yet.
Yeah.
Janelle is here.
So I'm just kind of in your office that you still reside. So meaning that. Wait, sorry. Meaning there might be months over there. I can look for them. I can also. I don't know.
All right. Welcome to class. Welcome back. I feel like I haven't seen you guys in a really long time, which is probably why Katie walked in and I was like, "You're in this class? Are you in this class?" So I apologize. It has been a long. Can I just tell you, I'm from the West. Our natural disasters are fires and earthquakes.
We just have tornadoes.
And I will gladly take an earthquake over the buildup of a hurricane. You know, like the week-long buildup to a, oh my gosh, it's going to destroy everything. And then, I mean, yes, it knocked out our power for 3 days and that sucked and everything. But, I mean, earthquake, in and out, done. Right? So, I don't know. A lot of people might have a different opinion about that, but I'd rather endure an earthquake. So, glad we're all back. Everyone's got power. We're all functioning. Yeah. Yes. Functioning to whatever degree that you are functioning. We're 4 weeks in, and we're making it. Today we're going to talk about contracting, standards of practice, and ethics in consulting. But before we do that, I believe today, your first consulting interviews are due by midnight. Does anybody want to talk about, do they have an awesome interview experience? Anybody want to share? I would like to hear kind of some experiences of what you guys have found. Who did you find? Where'd you find them? Who'd you talk to? I want to know. Inquiring minds want to know.
I had a
That's
good
like
one.
the National Enquirer slogan, by the way.
Jessica?
Yes, go ahead, Tara.
Yes. I had a really good one. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There's some feedback. Does anyone else hear that? No. Okay. So I spoke with a co-founder of BNF Consulting. So she works with nursing homes that are trying to incorporate culture change, and they started their business in 2004. So she actually, when Katrina hit down south, she actually went down there and helped them rebuild their nursing homes. And a lot of things that she was saying were actually things that we talked about in class. So that was pretty exciting.
Cool. Like, can you give some examples?
So her going in and being kind of an outside guest in their reality, and that she's not there to fix, but just to kind of offer feedback, and then they choose what they want to do. So she doesn't have set protocols for different programs. So she goes in and sees what they need and then kind of adjusts to what they're capable of doing to be the most successful.
Did you say, was this specific to rec therapy or no, just long-term care in general?
It was long-term care.
Cool. So
yeah.
Do people approach her to come in and be the consultant, or does she cold call people?
She doesn't market herself at all. It's all through word of mouth. So so actually everyone that I talked to didn't do any marketing.
How did they get their first job then?
So she collaborated with, I can't remember the name of it. I wrote it down in the interview. It was an organization from that works with the state with Medicaid. They don't have them anymore. So she partnered with them when they first started, And then once Katrina hit, then she went down south, and they got this reputation for working with nursing homes that weren't in the best situation, maybe in like a rough neighborhood, that were kind of tough to work with. And so now people just kind of look for her. She goes to the Pioneer Network conferences a lot and like keeps up her networking. But as far as soliciting clients, she doesn't at all.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's all she does too. It's not even a side job.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yes.
I wonder what percentage of people have to sell themselves versus they're just sought out. I don't have an answer for that one. So, but I guess we could see through our reports. How many of your people don't market themselves? Raise your hand. Oh my gosh, that's like everybody almost. So he's still initiating. It might not be like a total cold call, but he's still initiating it. He's not being sought out necessarily. Interesting. Okay. All right. Anybody else want to share? Okay, go ahead.
First off, last night I managed to find some time to watch a movie, and I watched the movie Pitch. It's about like a love consultant. I was like, I want to interview you. Well, what's his last name? But it wasn't too exciting. But I interviewed a political consultant, which is a weird thing on all levels. But one of the things that he said was that in order to like reach out. He knows that it would be good to go to like the state house and all different like legislative meetings, but he doesn't like to go to those things because he doesn't like dressing up. So that's about it.
Wait, so a political consultant, what does a political consultant do?
He runs a lot of campaigns.
Okay.
And
so like if I wanted to run for president, I could bring him in, and I've already got a campaign all set up and ready to go, and I can bring him in to evaluate like my people, and he can tell me who to get rid of and who to make my campaign manager. And
yeah, he does everything from like creating a campaign to everything.
Wow, maybe our previous presidential candidates and elected officials could have used them. Somebody, I'm sure they all had them too. So interesting. That's really different. I don't think. So does he market himself? Did you say no? Were you one of the ones? Yeah, that probably seems like a total inside job type of a thing. Like once you make a name for yourself, that first job, like then everybody just passes your name around type of a thing.
Yeah. He says that he goes to coffee shops and bookstores and stuff just so he can run into people. Just because, and like he targets down the people who are like in suits who look kind of political.
Where does he live?
Columbia, South Carolina.
So local politics, not national level politics. I guess it all matters. All right, cool. Okay, so you guys are having a hard time hearing us in class. You guys can probably all hear me because it's running off of my computer, right? But not everybody else. Okay, so what we'll do then is the in-class people, when you want to speak up, I will mute mine and you unmute yourself. And oh, somebody needs to mute. There, mute yourself. Hey, Derek, if you can hear us. Sorry, guys, hang on. Okay, so while Derek's figuring out that, anybody else want to share their interview?
Okay. Something I thought was really interesting was the guy I was talking to was saying that, like, it can be the best thing, but also one of like the worst things, just because you have a ton of responsibility. So if you fail, it's totally on you. And if you succeed, it's totally on you. But there's even more responsibility sometimes when you succeed, because you have to carry things forward. So I thought that was kind of an interesting perspective on it, because I like the idea of being my own boss, but there's a lot of responsibility and like accountability, I guess you could say.
Interesting. So whoa, sorry. When I did my interview for this project, when I was taking this class, I interviewed my uncle, who is a consultant to city manager people. So did you know that every city has a manager? It's not the governor or the mayor, or governors for the state, mayor for the city. Every city has a manager who runs the day-to-day business operations type of stuff. Anyways, that's what he consults to city managers, and he has like his PhD in economics and stuff like that. So I interviewed him and was blown away when he told me that the paychecks are, come and go type of thing. I didn't really think about that, but he's like, I get paid by the job. And so I might have work for 3 months and a paycheck for 3 months, but then after that I have nothing until I get my next job. So if I don't have my next job lined up, by the time I finish one job, then I go without a paycheck until I get my next job. So I could get paid $20,000 for this job for 3 months, which seems like a lot of money for $20,000 for 3 months of work. But then I might not have work for 3 months, so I have to make that $20,000 stretch for really 6 months worth of time until I get my next job. And I was like, I did not ever think about that. So if you're your own boss, you have to manage your money differently than somebody who's on a 9-to-5 job with a every 2 week paycheck or a month paycheck or whatever. I thought that was kind of crazy.
Whenever I asked my interviewee what one of his challenges was, it's to make a living. So yeah, but I mean, with him in politics and stuff, his paycheck is very like seasonal. Yeah. So it just comes in waves. Yep. With the election years and stuff.
All right. Does anybody else want to share?
My person, she said that her biggest challenge was incompetence, like with the level of employees. Like some employees had a lot of experience, and then other people didn't have the same level of experience or the want to try to do their job. So she felt like it was difficult sometimes to try to gauge how to deal with each person. Like, so she would have to kind of sort of adjust like how she interacts with people based on their personalities and that kind of thing, which I found kind of interesting, because that is true. Some people have they're more motivated to want to change or accept changes, and then other people are not necessarily as receptive, and they may not have the same level of competence. And she said that she would have to spend a lot of her time educating, which is something we talked about in class, is that sometimes you're the teacher, sometimes the other person is the recipient, or the educator and the recipient, whatever.
So in terms of competence, these people that she was dealing with didn't have the competence. Are you talking about like their skill in doing the job?
Like some people like had a different level of skill, like a different skill level than other people, even though they're in the same position. Like I interviewed an internal consultant, and so she goes to the different facilities, and she's a nursing consultant. So she has to oversee the clinical part of each person's job in like 4 different places. So she sees different people in the same position, and they all have different levels of competency, like in what they do. Maybe their skill level is not is suited for that position as the other person, but when she goes into each place, she has to go in with a fresh concept of this is a different person, a different personality, a different motivational level, and that kind of thing. And sometimes different people are less motivated to want to do what they're supposed to do. And then other people are like, yay, give me all your information and I'll suck it out of your brain, whatever. And she was talking about that. And I thought that was kind of sort of what we talked about in class. And she said sometimes she spends most of her consulting visits and her insight and things are kind of put to the wayside so that she can actually teach them before she can even implement new things or suggest new changes.
Mm-hmm. I think the one sentence you said in there, I think that sums all that up, is that every job you have to start as a clean, fresh, blank slate. Like, even if you do the same exact consulting every single time, so you guys are interesting because you're internal consultants and you have a very specified role and, you know, knowledge, it seems like, so you probably do the same thing at lots of different places, right? And so you do have to go in with no preconceived notions about anybody's competence or interest or motivation or whatever. And but even if you do different kinds of consulting jobs where it's a little bit different every time, but still within our wheelhouse, you still have to go in with a fresh, blank slate type of a thing. All right, anybody else want to share? These are interesting. I like hearing.
My person did both in-person consulting and also distance consulting. And she talked about kind of motivation as well and how much easier it was to get her in-person people to follow her recommendations, whereas often the online contact she had would become demotivated and it was just harder to get them to implement her ideas.
So in terms of the online people, were these just people who are at a distance from wherever she is and she couldn't go to their site, or?
Yeah, like they could be across the country rather than in her area.
What kind of a consulting business, like what does it do?
She is an essential oil consultant, so she helps other people who are trying to start businesses in essential oils.
So it's not like she has to go to a facility and see what they're doing.
She doesn't have to go to a facility to see what she's doing, but she often has to see like access to their business books and their contact lists and to see what they're doing to maintain their clientele.
Got it. So she can get all that access online then.
Right.
Yeah. So maybe it's like a case of out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah. Her in-person people, like she goes to their business or their home if it's a home-based business and she sees them. Yeah. Whereas the online people, she's just seeing their lists and their books.
Yeah. It's a lot harder to blow people off in person than it is online. So I guess that's something, if you're trying to go down this road, to consider if you want to be a high tech, you know, it all has barriers and, you know, advantages and disadvantages, but okay, interesting. Anybody else? No. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, so I interviewed, actually, it's a friend of mine that just graduated in the spring, and he works for like an engineering consultant company, and so for them, it's more on a like a word of mouth recruitment, I guess. So they kind of will make their first job in that part. They have to do a little bit of marketing and like connections, but pretty much once they're in, and they make a really good first impression, like making sure that they like build those trusting relationships, establish what their role is, and then do like a above average job on there, or like exceed the like minimum average, I guess, quality. They basically want to do the best job that they can so that they can keep that relationship. And then every time that the company they're working with needs another job, they just keep going back to the same person. So he made it sound like the recruitment process for jobs wasn't like that stressful. Well, granted, he since he is newer, he basically is placed somewhere and starts working on the project. He doesn't have to like come in and design something per se. I don't know, it was like engineering, so it was a little out of my realm, but basically it was their process of marketing. It was not very complex. It was more of, they made relationships, and once they were in, and they had consistent jobs. But yeah, he stressed the importance of making those trusting relationships and establishing their roles. And then one of the last things he said is like, always make sure you cover your butt and document every single thing that you guys like agree upon. So, but.
Okay, mute your. Okay, so super interesting, and I'm going to challenge all of you guys for your second interviews, if you haven't already found those people and lined that up, to maybe try to do one that is rec therapy specific. So after we had talked in class one day, somebody asked me, are there a lot of rec therapists who do this? And I didn't really have an answer to that. And so I went and talked to MVP and asked her, and turns out, yes, there are a lot of rec therapists that do consulting. So if you were to Google recreational therapy consulting or whatever, it will bring you up a site. Oh yeah, Elizabeth looked up a lady on there and emailed the lady and said, hey, can I interview you? And her husband responded and said, oh, I'm sorry, she passed away a few years ago from cancer. So it's not exactly the most up-to-date site. So maybe be slightly careful with that. But you can, I would challenge you guys, if you don't already have it set up, to maybe try to do a rec therapy specific one so that you have a little bit of insight into what it's really like for practitioners in our field to do consulting specific to us.
Her name's Michelle.
Yeah.
So if you go on the website, don't email Michelle.
Michelle, what was her last name?
Nota, something like that.
Michelle N.
Yeah.
Don't email her and ask to do an interview. I totally forgot about that until just now. Go ahead.
I did mine on a rec therapist, and so there's actually 4 or 5 rec therapist consultants here in Utah. So if anybody, just email me and I'll send you some information on who you can interview if you want.
Yeah, cool. Meet Tracy. Yeah. So, but also, guys, look up the rec therapy consulting on Google. I mean, it really does bring you up a lot of people you can talk to. And Mariko's like, surprisingly, they're all in California. So I don't know, maybe there's something about California. Yeah. All right. Chat amongst yourselves really quick. I'm just going to open up our stuff for today. So before we kind of jump into our discussion, what class is this? 8750. Sorry, just trying to dig through. All right. Before we jump into our discussion, just to follow up on some timeliness of things coming up. Next week, the MOAs are due. Yes. And then I did update the syllabus and post that, so it's all shifted. And online PhD student peeps, you guys never responded to me about whether or not you were okay with me shifting your dates. I assumed that you were interested in the dates by topic and not by necessarily the day that you were gonna teach class. So I kept you with your topics and just shifted you 1 week. So double check, make sure that week still works with you. And then I see Sandy giving me a thumbs up, so I assume that works. Okay, good. All right, that's it for housekeeping type of things. And by midnight tonight for your interview reports. I look forward to reading them all. Hopefully they're not 20 pages each. Right? Right. All right. So let's talk about making a contract and having this meeting, this contracting meeting, or however okay, I really hope that I can make my PowerPoints work for reals. What does that look like? Hey, it's working. Wait, what?
I said it looks like a PowerPoint.
Oh, okay. In the previous weeks, it's come up all messed up. Although now I can't see my notes.
Yes, I meant that sincerely.
All right, so one of the things that I didn't necessarily love about the chapters for this week is that it kind of makes it seem like that contracting meeting is a one meeting event. What do you guys think about that? Like you're just gonna have one meeting, hash all this out, sign it, and be good to go. Yeah. As I was reading through the chapters, I was like, man, that would be like one marathon meeting where you would have to book that person for multiple hours to be able to work through and hash all that stuff out. I don't think that I hope that's not what he's thinking. I don't think it is, but honestly, I don't think it's possible to talk about all that stuff in one meeting. So I feel like there are like multiple touch points that you would have with your person, whoever that person is, the person that gets you in the door, that you would have multiple contact points with that person before you ever had this actual meeting to negotiate some of those. I'm not saying like 10 contact points, but maybe 1 or 2 before you have this initial meeting to outline all of this stuff. That's my opinion, but I just don't see how you could get all this done in one meeting and everything. So, all right. Ready, set, go. PowerPoint. Okay, so what is a contract? Anybody want to try to define a contract? Pretty straightforward, right? I can't see mine. Look at yours. Oh, yours looks a little bit like mine. Blocked by blocked by camera view thingy. Yeah, I'm gonna move mine around. Sorry. Okay, there we go. All right, it's a legal agreement between a consultant and a client. Okay, so by means of which the client buys the services of the consultant. Okay, that's a pretty straightforward type of a thing. I think in the process of understanding what a contract really means, we have to know what these skills are for contracting. So there's a chapter in the book that talks about the general skills for consulting. Now we're getting a little bit more detailed. What are the general skills that you need to have for developing a contract? So all of this is really like the interpersonal skills that we as rec therapists kind of already have, right? We're just looking through this list. Being authentic, follow through, asking direct questions, trying to understand what your client expects of you, and then you as the consultant trying to put your expectations out there. So this is the same as like the client therapist or the patient therapist relationship that we're trying to establish as a rec therapist. So none of this looks to me like, oh my gosh, I don't have that skill. As a rec therapist, I hope that most of you guys already have all of these skills. Is there anything on here that you're looking at concerns you in terms of, I'm not sure I have that skill? I hope not. Good? All right, then I'm not gonna go point by point here. The majority of this, I think, is focused on, again, that interpersonal relationship elements. Okay, so basic elements of contract. Again, I provided you a template that has a lot of those basic elements. The template is really pretty basic, and so I think that if there are things in here that aren't present in that MOA template, you could add it, and that's fine. Every project is different, and so these might fluctuate based on what the project is, what the client wants, etc. But this is pretty much the basics of what you need. These products or deliverables is what we sometimes call them, could really fluctuate based on who you're working with and what you're doing. Okay, any comments or concerns or thoughts there? Some of this stuff is really straightforward and it's all out of the textbook, so I don't want to like be too crazy in here. Okay, and then there's all these rules to kind of keep in mind as you're having this meeting, developing this contract. Was there anything in here in the rules about contracting that you were like, what? That's a rule? I have to follow that? I noticed that there were a couple of comments in the little reading discussions for people who posted this week about verbal contracts. So this element here of writing contracts down. Is a verbal agreement or a verbal contract like a binding thing? What are your thoughts? So like, I'm trying to think of an example in rec therapy specific where you might have a verbal contract. Anybody else have any ideas of where you might potentially have a verbal contract in rec therapy?
What about something as something as simple as like going to the bathroom with someone who has a disability? Like they may say, yeah, it's fine, but like your overall job is not. Never mind. Ignore me.
Okay. I'm ignoring Elizabeth's comment because she asked me to. I was trying to think through that one, but I wasn't getting there.
It's been a long day.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody.
I'm thinking of an example along the lines of Elizabeth's, like a rock climbing contract where you're like, hey, on belay is on, climbing, climb on. You can teach communication that way. I mean, in the rec therapy sense of it, but it's a binding contract because you're saying, hey, I'm not going to drop you. I promise I have you on belay. And the climber's saying, okay, I'm climbing. I'm trusting you to have me.
Exactly. So a really simple example of a verbal agreement, right? So let's take it up a notch and think more in this like consulting world of what a verbal agreement could look like and whether or not that would be good or bad to have it be verbal versus written.
I mean,
maybe in this context, we wouldn't necessarily write down in a contract like, we will be on time for meetings, like I will actually show up. So maybe it's more of those like respect qualities that might be more of a like conversation of like, this is the kind of interaction that I would like to have, but you're not necessarily going to write out like a behavior list.
Sure.
Maybe.
So
But
it's not
I mean,
the whole contract that's verbal, but there are elements in it that are verbally.
are you trying to think of an example that's completely like only
I am,
verbal?
but I can't think of
I know.
Okay, so I maybe have an idea about one. So this is a project that I've actually been involved in, and it just came to an end. But I consult for this organization that does military. They provide, how to explain what they are. They are like a clearinghouse for recreation organizations that serve the military. So they don't actually provide any services. They just provide like a stamp of approval on programs that do provide the services so that veterans know who's good, who's bad, the good, the bad, and the ugly type of a thing. So I consult for them doing research on their member programs and like what the outcomes are of their programs and stuff. So when I first started working with them, and this place is like an infant in terms of nonprofit organizations, just started up. It's only like 3 or 4 years old. And I was there from the ground up, and they wanted to know all about research and how research could help them build and grow and help their member programs show that we are effective in what we do and helping veterans, etc. So I was explaining to them, this is what it can do. This is what a research project would look like, one example. And they loved it, ate it up, and said, this is what we want. This is what we want. Can you do it for us? And I said, well, sure, but I don't work for free. And they said, well, we're a nonprofit and we're just starting. Obviously, we don't even have like official nonprofit status. We don't have any money. So how could we make this work? And I said, well, I'm a faculty member and I kind of have to do research by nature of my job. So I could get started on this project for you guys without being technically paid by you. I'd be paid by my institution to do my job, which I could just align my research element with what you guys want. And so I'd be working on it naturally. And they said, sure, we love it. And if we can get some money, we'll pay you. And I was like, okay. So in thinking about this in terms of verbal contracts and not having something written down, I totally see that as having been a verbal contract that was non-binding. Because did I make that my priority? To some degree I did, because it aligned perfectly with what my job as a faculty member was in terms of my research aim as a faculty member, my research arm. There were no timelines established. There were no deliverables established. There were no client wants or consultant expectations or anything like that. And so when it was just kind of slowly limping along because I didn't have time because I had a heavy teaching load that semester or something like that, there was really no accountability on my part for that. So I think that's I mean, that I think would be an extreme example of a verbal agreement. I will say in that same project, funding finally did come through, and we created a contract, and we created the deliverables and the timeline and all that stuff. And as soon as that came into existence, it was like, whoosh. I could not just like, I'll get around to it when I get around to it type of a thing, which wasn't really how I was acting before anyways. But, if something came up in my job here, I wasn't going to like drop it just to do that other thing with no contract and no money type of a thing. I would say that in a nutshell, I think we probably all agree verbal contracts are not a good idea. Write it down. Get every element that you can written down if you can get paid for it. I mean, we don't work for free, people. People have had to beat that into my head. You do not work for free. So people may ask you, hey, can you just come and do this and help me out with this? And out of like the good naturedness of our hearts, because we're helping, we work in a helping profession, right? And we're all pleasers. Maybe we're not all pleasers. I'm a total pleaser. So I try to say yes to everything. We would want to go and do it without getting paid, but we don't work for free, people. All right. Somewhere in a commentary question, how do people effectively follow through with a verbal contract? Any ideas? How do you follow through with that?
Verbal check-ins. I mean, I don't know.
Something like meeting minutes. Like if you're sorry.
Go ahead.
If you're in a meeting and you have a secretary and you talk, and then the secretary gets back, types everything up, and then emails it out to everyone. It's kind of like meeting minutes.
Maybe what this question is asking about, because that seems like just part of the process. I guess you would do that regardless of whether you have a verbal or written contract. But if there are no timelines or deliverables established, how does the project actually move forward without something like that? I mean, maybe there is, okay, let's say there is a verbal contract by December of 2017, you will provide me with this. Is that enough to keep somebody accountable and on track? Do you guys think?
I feel like there has to be incentives for it. Like,
Unmute your, yeah. I know it's awkward today, people. Sorry.
I feel like there has to be like some kind of incentive, like, I don't know, like a monthly, I don't know, depending on like the timeline, like, or after each step is done, kind of like it benefits both. There has to be benefits for both the client and the consultant. So like more of an incentive basis instead of like, I have this contract, I have to get this done. But it benefits both of you.
So what kind of an incentive?
Money? Or, I don't know.
Sorry, is there anybody else? I'm not saying yes or no. I'm just trying to see how that would not also be part of a written contract process.
I guess, well, if you have like a contract, like you're just following the contract, like I'm doing this because it says it in the contract, but like it's just a verbal agreement, like in order for both of you guys to be like working on it, you both have to be motivated to keep it going. Instead of just saying like, oh, contracts have to get this done.
So is there any different element of accountability for a verbal contract versus a written contract, or a verbal agreement versus a written contract? I mean, what happens if you break your contract, a written contract? As a consultant, you get fired, right? And you don't get paid. Is there any other repercussions? Maybe they start bad-mouthing you around town and you can't get future jobs. Yeah, a bad example in the RT field and type of thing. I imagine that if there's a verbal agreement, that all those same things could happen as well. I'm just trying to think of like the accountability. Has it? Go ahead.
I have an example. The person that I interviewed, she said that there were a few times where the people that she had gone and observed or was doing the consulting for weren't quite ready for her services yet. And so she gave them a list of things to work on that they needed before she would be able to put a plan together for them. Would that be like a verbal contract, like come visit me when you've done these 4 things?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd go as far as calling it a contract. As much of it's just like an agreement, like, yes, I'll work with you, but you're not quite ready yet. So here's some tips to get in a good place, and then come and talk to me. And then did she follow up with them and check in over the process, or did she just let them manage that on their own? And then
she did. She'd drop in on them and see where they were at with that.
Well, and that's probably out of her own, that benefits her because that's a potential client. And so if she can demonstrate small amount of, or put forth a small amount of investment in them, it may turn into a bigger investment when they become an actual paying client, right? So, okay. So, but that's no different than like having a formal written agreement already. So let's say they were ready, she would still check in with clients as she was going through the process of working with somebody. I don't know, maybe there's no clean answer to this one. How to effectively follow through with a verbal contract or a verbal agreement, or at least nothing that's different than what you would do with a written contract. I don't know who asked that question. Good question. Stumped all of us. All right, so this meeting or meetings. Okay, so again, I don't that it's a one-time thing. Priority number 1 is establishing who the client is, and somebody needs to mute their mic. We're getting feedback. Who is your client? I think, okay, so priority number 1. So when I'm going to use this job working with this military organization as an example as we talk through this, were my clients the individual programs that I was going to be doing research on, or was my client the umbrella nonprofit organization? Yeah, the umbrella nonprofit organization. They're the ones who asked me to do this study, and they would give me access to veterans through all of these programs. Now, when I kind of initially had these conversations with them, I said, this is what I can do for you. And this is one of the biggest barriers to me doing research with the military population is getting access. So I just need you to grant me access and I can study all these programs. Now, as I was doing this project with them, I interacted with the individual people at these individual sites that I was collecting data from, but they weren't really ever my client, other than saying, can you send out my survey? And here's a packet of surveys, send it back to me. That was my only interaction with them. But when it came to having meetings and doing reports and all of that stuff, that all went to that higher level, the umbrella organization, the nonprofit. But in trying to illustrate my point, if we hadn't figured that out and I started sending my, quarterly reports to these individual organizations, the people that I was just asking to send out my link, and then all of a sudden they're getting a report, I'm sure it would have freaked them out. And they'd be like, what am I supposed to do with this? And not knowing anything about what was going on with the bigger project could certainly alienate my participants to some degree. So it's just really important to establish who your client is from the get-go, and that client should be present in as much as possible in all meetings and discussions and phone calls as possible. Sometimes you have kind of like a liaison in your place, in your facilities, where they'll be the ones who do the day-to-day stuff with you, and that's okay. But for big meetings, the client, sounds like a John Grisham novel, needs to be there. Is that actually a John Grisham title? No. All right, so there are these steps in navigating this meeting, quote, meetings. Okay. No, come back. Why does that last one keep disappearing? Anyways, we'll get to step 8 in a minute. Okay, so having this personal acknowledgement, right? So thank you for calling me. I'm so glad that, this is like the schmooze type of a thing. I'm really glad that I can help you with this issue, assuming that they contacted you. Or let's say you're like the coffee shop style type of interacting with people, that initial interaction, they, thanks for letting me come and talk to you about this. So who was it you said they went to conferences and noticed things first and then invited people, hey, can I take you? That would be a thanks for coming, to get coffee with me. I'd love to talk to you about your program and what I've noticed. In a way, I think I may be able to help you. I am not a salesman. And if somebody says no to me, nope, I don't need your service, I'll be like, thank you very much, and walk away, type of a thing. I think that if you're trying to really sell yourself as a consultant, you got to not do that or you'll never have a job, right? And so, man, I know that this is an area for improvement for me if I want to be somebody who has to sell my services. That sounds weird, but I'm not a schmoozer, not at all. But I think for the purposes of being a consultant, I would have to increase my ability in that area. But thank you for meeting with me. I'm so glad that we can potentially work on this project together. Okay, and then you got to talk about what this problem is. Why are we here? Why are we together? Why are we having this cup of coffee? Why did you call me in the first place? You may already know a little bit. So if so-and-so site calls you and says, hey, I heard you're a consultant, word of mouth, somebody told me you're great and I'd love to hire you, we're having this problem. Can we meet next week? Sure. In that week, I am on their website, if they've got one, learning everything I can learn about them. And I think we talked about this in another discussion, in another class. Finding out as much about your client beforehand so you go into that prepared. So when you get here to step 2, you already know a little bit, and there's not a whole lot of education that they have to do on your part in bringing you up to speed. They can just state what that problem is, and you guys can talk about it, but not have to hash out this insane amount of information. Yeah.
Another thing the guy said that I interviewed was that a lot of times people don't actually know what the real problem is.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's something that applies to RT as well?
Potentially. I mean, I think so. I mean, I'm trying to think of an instance where somebody in rec therapy will bring a consultant in and say, this is what the problem is. But I think it's worth having that conversation to see if that's really what the problem is, because different people in the organization may have a different perspective. And in the process of finding out what those perspectives are, you realize that the problem isn't really here, just that person sees it as being there, but the problem is a bigger problem, or it's really, this is the actual problem. And so, but I'm also thinking in a staffing element where they might bring a consultant in and they say, I don't really know what the problem is. I just know that we don't get a lot of work done. Right? So that kind of seems like a potential example where we're not really sure what the problem is. You just see the effects of a problem. And so maybe the role there as a consultant is that you just have to do a lot of observation of what's going on in the daily functioning of this nursing home, why nobody asks the rec therapists to be involved in anything. The rec therapy director has asked you to come in and evaluate why rec therapy services aren't being used in this nursing home, even though you have 10 rec therapists and all this stuff. I don't know why they won't ask us to do anything, but they won't. Not sure what the problem is. Is it me as the RT director? Am I not doing a good job getting us out there and letting them know that we're a service available? Or do they not take us seriously? Or, all the things that we've kind of talked about from all of our long-term care people who have all of this experience, right? I'm just not sure what the problem is. I just know that they're not using our services. So then as the consultant, I would probably be talking to all of the non-rec therapy staff and saying, what do you think about rec therapy? Doing a lot of observation, just fly on the wall type of stuff, talking to administrators about all the different services that are offered. So part of that initial conversation may not really identify a problem, a nice solid problem, but at some point there's got to be a problem identified so that you have then something to work on. And maybe this is where the multiple meetings comes in, where you have to go back and refine a little bit about, okay, let me do just some initial work here to figure out what's going on, and then maybe we can come back and clarify this element of it, type of a thing. Okay, so step 3, identifying what the client wants. I want rec therapy services to be prescribed and used every day. I want my 10 rec therapists to work, or I have to fire them all, or I have to reduce my staff down to 1 rec therapist. Whatever other client wants are in there. And then the consultant wants. One thing that I thought was really interesting in the book that they talked about, that the consultant wants are usually like disregarded and thrown to the wayside and not really ever considered in the process of establishing establishing this contract. So what would be some consultant wants, you think? As a consultant, what do you want and or need?
You need provision of all the stuff that you need to review. Like you need access to materials and records and datelines and
People.
that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. That's one of the things, if you look in that section in the chapter, it just listed like 5 or 10 things that were consultant needs and wants. Access. You know, we can't do our job if people don't let us in. It's one thing to be in the building and be a fly on the wall and to see things, but you can only get so much information from that. You've got to be able to talk to people. You've got to be able to look at documents, records, whatever. And if there's just like a wall to that, then it's not going to happen. You know, access to administrators, I think, is an important element as well. So as part of this project that my consulting research that I did with this organization, when things started getting really difficult, which this was a 2-year project with them, there was a point where I had to butt my way into a board meeting because they were having conversations kind of off to the side without me and making decisions about this research project, which they had really no ability to make decisions about because they're not researchers. But that stuff impacted me directly, but they weren't involving me in that. And when I heard about it, I was like, you know, and so I just like emailed a few people and said, I would like to join your board meeting next week and talk to you about what's going on. I literally butted my way, and I don't know where I got so ballsy, but I did. But the fact that this wasn't really kind of negotiated at any point that I would attend a board meeting to update, I was, you know, having to communicate with like a liaison type of a thing. And I'm not sure what that liaison was communicating, or if he was at all communicating anything to the board, but apparently maybe not, because they had their own idea of what was going on. So, you know, it's important that we ask for the things that we need in order to do the job and not feel bad about that. And it's hard, and the book talked about this, when organizations say, come in and do this, but don't make any impact on our daily functioning. You know, as little as possible, don't ruffle anything. Well, I don't know if that's really possible. If we have to talk to people, if we have to talk to patients maybe in a site, if we have to go through, you know, patient records or charts or anything like that, obviously we're going to have an impact somewhere, and that has to be in there somewhere, that nobody's going to get mad that you're doing that. I don't know if that's how you would phrase it. Don't get mad at me if I disrupt your daily flow of your facility. That's not like a bullet point type of a thing. I sound like a 13-year-old. Why are you getting mad at me? I used to say that to my mom all the time when she'd yell at me. But you would phrase it in a more professional manner in terms of being able to have access when needed to the resources and people and et cetera. All right, consultant wants. Okay, getting to step 5, making an agreement about all of this. The book spends forever on when you get stuck on step 4 and step 5 and such. And I don't want to like belabor that because we read all about it. But if you guys have questions, we can talk about that. Step 6, asking for feedback on control and commitment. So, and then step 7, give support. I feel like this goes kind of both ways, where you do need feedback on how they think the process is going. I will say that in this project that I've worked on with this organization, not once have they ever told me what they thought about it in 2 years. Yeah.
Are you still doing it?
No, it's done. I mean, the contract is, I've worked through all of that. I don't know what they thought, what they think. I mean, they paid $75,000 for this. You'd think that they would tell me good job, bad job. I don't know. Maybe I assume something that I shouldn't assume, but I don't know. I feel like they're not happy with the outcome because it took a lot longer. Well, not a lot longer. I did it in the timeline, but the people who are on the board of directors now, when the project finished, were not the people who negotiated the contract when it started. And so I think they're unhappy with how long it took, even though they had no say in the timeline. Have they communicated that to me directly? No, I just hear rumblings, from like my liaison and little things here and there type of a thing. So then also when I have to do things like butt my way into a board meeting and I hear little rumblings about things in there, why is this taking so long? This is the established timeline, but to not have any of that feedback, I don't really know. It's been really frustrating and makes me angry, to be honest, because this is my work and this is my time. I'd like some feedback if you think I did. And I've never been paid $75,000 to do anything before except for like my job, but I don't make that much money, by the way. But that's, that was a lot of money, and I would hope that I provided you what you wanted, right? But no feedback. No.
How do you even go about establishing, like, what does getting feedback look like? Is that like is that something you build into your timeline? Like after the fact, like, let's have a conversation because I would love for future projects to know how I could do better? Or like, have you had experiences where you have a formal feedback session, or is it more of them seeking you out to tell you feedback?
I think that is a fantastic question, and I don't think it's all at the end type of a thing. I think it has to be kind of built into this process that, we will have check-in points every 3 months where we will get on a phone call and talk about the progress and everything. And maybe this is partly, I'm not going to put it all on them. Maybe I just didn't think about this part of it as I was kind of negotiating this contract with them. I put in there that I would send them like quarterly reports or something, but it was just in a Word document, and I sent it to my liaison, and I assumed he sent it to the board. Maybe he never sent them any of those things, so they went 18 months with getting no insight into the progress, and so they're angry, and then they don't work directly with me. They go through him, and he doesn't communicate that back to me. So then I'm thinking, well, they don't care about what I'm doing, or I don't know. And then to all of a sudden at the end kind of hear like these rumblings, like, to me, it seems out of the blue. So I think that it's a check-in progress as you go that is more than just here's where we are. It's let's have a conversation about this. Things are going well. Things are not going well. From my perspective as the consultant. From you, how do you see things going? And I mean, 18 months is a really long time. The contract period was 18 months. I was working on it, prior to that for a couple of months of the verbal agreement type of thing. So this 2-year process, but if you're doing a job for somebody that is, Shelly, how long are some of your consulting jobs?
I'm trying to get it to unmute. Sorry. I would say I go every 3 months, and then typically, sorry, my dog, she doesn't see me all day, so she's like, and then if there's like something special that comes up, like if a state survey happens, or they need me to come in for an extra visit, like for follow-up, then I usually come in for that too. And then I have to contact, like through email. I'm always available, email, FaceTime, Skype, that kind of stuff, over the telephone. I do that in between my 3-month periods sometimes. Like if it's something specific that is important that we fix, like before we have like a survey coming in or federal VA or whatever, then I may like actually send an email or make a phone call to say, hey, how is this going? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but you're basically each job is about 3 months.
Yeah, kind of like this one contract. I'm an internal consultant, but I have a contract. Does that make sense? Okay. One of my facilities, I've been going every 3 to 6 months for 2 years now.
Wow.
And then that's because of the turnover in the area. And then the other one, it's been for about a year.
So
and they decided to just keep me on because it was helping.
So every time you go, are you doing the same thing every time you go, or is it something?
No, I do audits. I always do audits, chart audits, to make sure that they're maintaining things that they're supposed to. And then I do observations, and then I try to implement new things, and then we just kind of see how it's going. For the most part, it's more of a overseeing type thing. Does that make sense? To make sure they're staying on track and they're maintaining the things that they're supposed to do.
So you need to have check-ins periodically throughout whatever your time period is, but it's more than just saying, hey, here we are. I think that it needs to be this is what I think good, this is what I think bad on both parts. And that way, that's the feedback element. So yes, it needs to be built in. But then at the end of a project, there needs to be a final type of a thing, like, here's the whole shebang, and this is how it went. Let's talk about this, especially if this is a facility or a client that you may want to work for again in the future. There's got to be that feedback. And maybe you have built into your own little business some type of customer evaluation of your services that then provides you this like final feedback element. Yeah, that would be a good idea. All right. Step 7, giving support. So it goes both ways, basically. So we want them to give us feedback. We want to give them feedback, but then we also have to give people support along the way to make sure, hey, you're doing a great job. I know it's really hard to let me come in and, evaluate all this thing or tell you how good or bad you're doing, but thank you for letting me do that. And you're doing a great job, and way to really bring your crew together, and all with the hopes of improving your services type of a thing, the fluff, right? Okay, step 8. It disappears instantly. Can you guys even see it before it disappears? Yeah, Reese.
Is it possible that you could do like when you're talking about the evaluation portion of stuff, like you suggested, like having them evaluate your services, like kind of like a survey at the end of your evaluation period to kind of hear how they feel your tactics are? Is that what you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like to hear their input of how they feel the process went?
Yeah. Well, and this is, this is beyond just this initial meeting, but you could do something like that. Man, each one of these steps we talked about happens in the meeting, but could also happen broadly over the course of the entire time. So, we're giving feedback during this meeting and getting feedback during this meeting, but then also broadly, yes, you can develop some sort of survey, customer satisfaction type thing that you would give at the end. If you had like a website, you could have like, my clients rate me 4 stars out of 5 in my consulting services type of a thing, or 2 thumbs up, I don't know, and have little testimonials. But that goes way beyond this step. As we were talking about this, I got so into it, I was thinking beyond just this meeting, but in these initial meetings and setting up this contract, we still have to give feedback and get feedback. What do you think about what we're talking about? Is this okay? Is this along the lines of what you're thinking? Type of thing. So we're checking in during that meeting like we would checking in over the course of the project as well. Okay, step 8 is restating actions. I don't know why it's doing that, sorry. So making sure that we just like tie it back around. Okay, so this is what we talked about at the beginning, that we're going to do this, this, and this. Now that we've talked about all the stuff in between, here we are, just to be clear, this is what we're going to do. Boom, boom, boom. And then everyone says, yes, this is perfect. Sign, sign, sign. And then you're off. Okay, another commentary question. During the meeting with the client to discuss the contract, what is the best way to address commitment and negotiate needs without appearing to be demanding? So I'd like you guys to break out into groups of 2, and online peeps, I'll split you off into groups here, and I will come and eavesdrop on your, hang on a second. I'm gonna just like butt my way into your little groups to hear what we're talking about. So think about that question. I'll say it again. During the meeting with the client to discuss the contract or meetings, what is the best way to address commitment and negotiate needs without appearing to be demanding, right? Because we're going to ask people, I need you to commit to giving me access to your people. I need you to free up people from their work schedules to, whatever. Some things we're going to ask for are big and other things we're going to ask for are small. How do we do that in such a way that we don't come across as like, rah, demanding, needy, blah, type of a thing? Okay, I can do breakout rooms. Okay, you know what? Actually, in-person peeps, this is gonna assign people to these breakout rooms randomly, and so you might be paired with an online person.
Will that be noisy?
You guys can spread out, so some people can go here and on the couches out in the hall, and you can put your headphones on. Okay, ready, set, go. Oh gosh, undo. I need 7 rooms, not 2 rooms. There we go. Okay, so Shelly and Tara, Elizabeth and Whitney, Charity and Natalie, Brooke and Janelle, Derek and Jasmine, Sandy and Sydney, and Katie and Tracy. So ready, go. So you'll have to join your room. It'll tell you. And then I'm gonna just barge in.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Feel free to talk away. I'm putting on headphones.
Okay, so my thoughts were maybe opening it up at conversation by saying like asking them what they see at level, like in their opinions, what do you see me do?
She asking for how we actually say it. Oh, good. Jasmine, are you asking for tactics? Or are you asking for how we would phrase it?
And then
Tactics.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, both. Yes to both of those.
Okay.
I think I agree with you. The honesty is definitely, if you like lay out exactly what you want to do, like you're honest from the beginning and you're not like trying to sneak in some sneaky like mojo stuff, then maybe just be like, hey, real, I don't really know what to expect in this process, just like you don't. Let's just try to work,
Would that be something you talk about before they even sign the contract? So just say, listen, up front, this is something that's important. Like, this has to happen. Like, if you're not comfortable with that just yet, then maybe we can work down the road. But right now, this is what needs to happen. So they don't feel like they're kind of, I guess, sideswiped.
I feel like you're not a doormat.
Doing like checkups about those expectations. Like, okay, remember that first conversation we had where you setting the standards, like, are you feeling
it would be a different story. Hi, Jasmine. But I think the transparency, just being very upfront that these are the things that you observe, these are the things that you think are going to be necessary. Understanding that there may be some sensitive information and just providing that reassurance and validating that
During the meeting,
really your goal is to facilitate the best possible outcome for the client.
Say that last part again. It kind of got messed up with the other sounds in the room.
I said I think ultimately just providing validation that you're there to facilitate the best possible outcome for the client. And I think there's going to be a certain level, not necessarily of like being really blunt with them, but just being professional and being honest that there will be some sensitive information that you'll have to look.
At the end, at the end of things, going back to that feedback aspect that you were talking about in class earlier, keeping that as a part of your evaluation, I don't know exactly how you'd word it. You wouldn't be like, how demanding was I? But, did the expectation of commitment work out in the way that you were thinking, I guess?
Yeah.
Yeah, so some way of kind of review or reflecting on the level.
Howdy.
Hey. Are you guys done? Oh, okay. You guys went through it quick. All right, I'm gonna call on you guys then, since I didn't get to hear it. Okay, bye.
Their screen porch went out. Hey.
Hey, how's it going in here? How do you not be demanding?
Kind of test your waters first before you just go in and saying like, I need this, this, and this. Get to know them before demanding stuff, and you can learn but pleasant.
Good. Okay. Sorry, I got a bunch of groups to jump in and out of, so that was good. Thanks for letting me barge in.
But I might be coming in and saying, you guys.
Building. I work in a long-term care rehab building. And the licensure here in Utah requires that you have to at least be a certified therapeutic record specialist to oversee your own building. So I have my own building. Okay. And then I also work for a consultant who has, right now she has 45 buildings, which is a lot. So I work for her, like I said, doing care plans, writing care plans, and doing assessments, and I help her with workshops and things like that. And she actually, her part is just she goes in and visits with the other therapists, make sure that they're doing their jobs and keeping up with state licensure and stuff like that. So.
Really does help if you involve.
And that's like my goal is to be a consultant.
Guys, can I ask you, how do you not be demanding?
So we talked about kind of explaining why the need is important. So whatever you're asking them, we mentioned like getting access to like records and computer systems. So we talk about like addressing the importance of it and explaining why it's important and why you need access to that, or so I guess explaining it and why it's important.
Exactly, but I know I had
the point that we hit on.
Yeah, that's a good, the why aspect of it is probably important. Okay, good. I'm going to bring everybody back.
Okay.
Come back. Are you in the master's or PhD? So we're probably going to sit here awkwardly for 30 more seconds.
No, you won't.
Oh. Thanks.
Guys, aren't breakout rooms so cool? I really like it, and thank you for letting me barge in on your conversations. I didn't get to hear your guys' conversation, but that's okay.
It's really good.
So I'm gonna give you guys an example of not related to a consulting project that I did, but as a job element where I was asking for things that were required as part of my job, but that were interpreted as being like super demanding. So I was working once at a residential treatment center, and I came in as like their rec therapist, although pre my knowledge of what rec therapy was and everything. I had a lot of duties there, and part of it was managing managing like the inventory for the patients as they came into the treatment center. And this company had just previously dumped everybody's stuff in a room and didn't label any of it and didn't do anything. And so they had asked me to go through and organize all this stuff. And of course, I don't know whose stuff is whose. So I was going through separating out things that looked, these were bathroom things, these are clothes, these are other things, all things that they couldn't have while they were in this treatment center. And then I needed the kids to come and identify whose stuff was whose. And so I would grab them as they were in between, going from one place to another place, another building on this campus of this treatment center. And I would just say, hey, can you come and look at this as you guys are walking by and tell me whose stuff is whose so I can do my job of inventorying and labeling, right? And I was told, just do it. Just grab them as they're going from building to building. That's what my boss told me to do. And I said, okay. And so I did that. Apparently all of the staff who were moving them from place to place and their counselors and whatever, all these psych tech people were super pissed because they didn't know who I was. And they thought that I was brand new, right? I've been there for like a week or two and I wasn't like introduced to the company or anything like that. And here's Jasmine, our new whatever I was. Okay, so I was doing what I was told to do, but it was not communicated to other people what I was doing. And I think in this instance it needed to be, whether that was communicated by me or somebody else, I'm not really sure. I may have dropped the ball on that. So I was just asking these people, but these psych techs went back and they were just like, well, who the crap is this girl? Asking us, pulling our kids as we walk by and doing all this stuff. They were mad. They thought I was rude. They thought I was demanding. They thought that I didn't know what the heck I was doing, which could be true also. So all this stuff, I think, again, not related to a consulting project, but a really clear example in my mind of how we think we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, but it could come across as demanding, unnecessarily or unintentionally demanding, right? So when we're negotiating a contract and we're asking for things and saying like, okay, if you want me to do an audit of your documentation, I need to have access to electronic and paper. I don't know, Shelly, I sound like I may know what I'm talking about, but I don't because I've never done this. So you could weigh in more on what you would actually have to ask for and how you would ask for it. But, access to all, if you're doing a chart audit, like you said, how would you phrase that to your client as you're in this process of negotiating this contract and establishing what it is that you need?
I would pretty much say that I needed a list of I need accessibility to patient records that are related to the project. Maybe.
I mean, that doesn't sound demanding to me. Sure, go right ahead.
Yeah. I mean, and then you can also say like on an as needed basis. So it's not like you're like, I need access to every chart in this building. Mm-hmm. Just the ones that are related to my audits, that are related to the project or whatever I'm doing that particular visit. And I usually give them a list of the things that I need.
Let's pretend that I'm your client and you're asking me for this. Yeah. I just put you on the spot.
Okay.
And I'm going to be difficult.
Really? Okay. Okay. Hi. No, I don't know how to say this. Okay.
Let's just skip to the part where you're telling me what you need.
Okay. Hopefully we can work on this project together. And I know this might seem a little overwhelming for you, but I'm going to need a list of all of the things, like I need all of, I can't even talk. I need all of the things that may apply to the project that we're working on the audits that we're going to be doing. And if you can help me find the things that I need, that would be awesome. But I can give you a list of the things that I'm going to need accessibility.
Oh my gosh.
I'm getting over the flu. I'm sorry. I'm not thinking straight today.
Tell me what's on this list because I don't know if I can handle this piece of paper on my desk. Just tell me what's on this list of things that you need. Make it up. Side note, make it up, do an example of what maybe you would really ask for.
Okay. I probably am going to need access to at least 20 random charts. I would prefer to have access to 5 random charts from each of your units. I'd also like to have access to all of your documentation related to those 20 people. And I would also like to have the ability to ask you any questions when you're available in between your groups, if that would make, as time will allow. I know that your job is pretty stressful and intimidating, and you probably don't have this extra time, but any time that you can devote to that would be awesome, because hopefully we can streamline things maybe to make your job less stressful.
Do I need to get you 20 charts all at once? Like I'm bringing you
No.
books of documentation?
No, if you could just probably maybe bring me 5 at a time. Let's start with 5 per unit.
And where are you going to review all of this? Do I need to give you a special room or an office, or are you going to do this at my desk? Or
Well, I know your desk is pretty busy, so if you have a free library or extra office that no one's using, that would be fine. Just a corner of the space is all I'm asking.
okay, we
And
don't
if you're
have any extra space anywhere. So where could you do this if we have no free desk space? I mean, I don't
it needs to be some
car, but I mean, we don't have extra space.
Well, is it possible that you could maybe just give me a chair in an area that's not in a private area, because the charts cannot be reviewed by other people. I'm the only person that should be able to see them.
Okay, so then you can't like spread out all over a table in our cafeteria, our patient.
That's probably not a great idea.
So 5 charts at a time, and we do electronic documentation here. So how are you, what are you?
Well, perfect. That makes it so much easier. If you could just find me one of your computers that you're not using. I know a lot of them are being used at the time, but if there's a nurse's station that's free, I will move to whatever nurse's station that's available. And if I can have like an access code, I would suggest maybe emailing one of your corporate IT techs, and maybe they can give me a readers only code that maybe only I can see and not be able to actually make any changes, just be able to view only.
Okay.
And that's probably what you give your surveyors or your the people that come in, JCO, when they come to review your work. They can probably easily get that for me.
Okay, that sounds familiar. I think I've done that before. But don't you have your own laptop or your own tablet or something like that has that?
I do, for the most part, but in most computer documentation, you have to have a special, you have to have a special server on your computer. So for me to be able to do that, and this being my first time, I don't think the company is going to provide that. So if you could just get me a readers only, I can access any computer that's available. And I guarantee your coordinators for your nursing clinical, they probably have extra computers that they would give a inspector when they come in the facility. And I will gladly take that one if it's not being used.
Fantastic. Way to go, Shelly. Good job. Good job. I know I put you on the spot, but that was really good.
Sorry, I was stuttering.
No, that's okay. Okay, so there will be a process like this where you just have to go back and forth, and especially for somebody, a client who's never had anybody come and do anything like this, they might be like, what? You want me to do what? Type of a thing. And so it is like an element, and I loved how you like tied in the JCO thing. Like, this is probably something that happens all the time in your facility. So again, knowing a little bit about the facility and what kind of things that they may have already similar to some degree gone through is really, well, that certainly ups your credibility. It looks like you know what you're talking about already, and so great job. Fantastic job. I forgot what we're talking about right now. Hang on. Oh yeah. So I don't think that any of that came across as being demanding, right? And you explained, and some of you had talked about this in the little breakout rooms, of explaining the why you need something type of a thing. When I was doing my little job of inventory, like, I didn't explain to any of these staff why I was asking them to come over, other than I need them to identify their stuff. They didn't know that I had been tasked with managing the mountain of crap that had just been dumped in this room. I don't even know if they knew there was a mountain of crap. Actually, they were the ones dumping it, so they knew. But anyways, So sometimes explaining why you need the things that you're asking for could be really beneficial in getting over that, like, oh, I have to give her access, or oh, I've got to do this type of a thing. I'm totally going to call out, who was it? Derek, and I don't know who you were paired with, but I didn't get, oh yeah, Jasmine too. I didn't get to hear what you guys were saying. So what did you have about not being demanding and getting people to commit?
First, identifying like what they want to get out of the consulting project, and then identifying what you'll need in order to make that happen and why you need those things to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I think as long as we're clear and upfront, and it doesn't turn into, every couple of weeks you're like, oh, now I need this, then it won't seem demanding.
Yeah, and I think that there will be instances where something pops up and you have to go back and say, oh, I need this, and we hadn't really talked about that. But as long as you have kind of established that prior relationship of, this is what I think I'm going to need, it's clear what the issue is. So when you go back and ask for something, it's not a big ask. Like, oh, now I need, I don't know, what would be a next level ask from access to electronic documentation, Shelley, that you would be like a bigger ask than that you think people might be like, ooh, that's a lot.
But refuse it. Wait, reword that again.
What would be something like more than access to electronic documentation, like a bigger thing that you would ask for, where people might really push back on that a little bit?
Like in my field, because I work in rec therapy and long-term care, they have to have daily documentation that's not in the electronic records. So sometimes I ask for that. Sometimes I ask for things like, if every now and then, probably once a year, I do a group interview with the actual patients to kind of get their input on their leisure and what their interests are, to see that their needs are being met. And they may ask for things like outings. So I may want to see their outing logs, or I may want to see their voter registration. Like some of them will say, I never get the opportunity to vote. Well, that's a big thing. So I may say, I need to see all your voter registration records. And if they didn't do it, then that's like, like they freak out, like participation logs or in-room visit logs or things that it's important to do for small groups that they may not have done. They always freak out about that because they probably didn't do it, you know.
So that might be something that, that's like a nitty-gritty detail that might not be explicitly discussed in the negotiation of a contract, that may come up later, that you go back and ask for, and some people may interpret that, well, this was never negotiated before, so that might come across as demanding, and in other ways it might not. And I think if you were to explain, like most of you have said, the why you need something like that, hopefully they might not like it, especially if they don't do it, but hopefully they'll come
Staff files are a big one too. Like if you want to see their staffing files or in-service records, things like that, like proof that they actually did in-servicing and stuff like that. That's kind of stuff that people, unless they're really organized, they don't have it, and then they have to go dig for it and find it, and then they freak out about it because they're like, oh crap, I was supposed to keep up with that and I didn't, and then they get all like psychopath on you.
I would imagine that anything that is like spur of the moment requests outside of that initial meeting would come across as being demanding and holy crap, who do you think you are type of a thing. So that's why in that meeting you want to try to address anything that may contribute to what you're doing. But of course we can't always get everything that first time, and that if you leave like an asterisk for and other things as needed, hopefully it would fall under that and then not be a problem. But there's always going to be something, there's always going to be somebody, right, that likes to freak out. Okay, so it's 7:30. Let's take a quick break for like no more than 7 or 8-ish minutes. So come back at 7:40. Ready, go. I'm going to try pausing the recording again. Okay. Everybody's got a meeting.
I don't know why I did that. Now I
Okay.
was trying to put the video.
Come on back, everyone.
Yeah. You gonna join the rest of our class?
I'm gonna join 7 minutes of class.
Oh.
Or 10 or whatever.
Yeah.
Oh, for real?
So we have a guest speaker right now in class. You can come over here and in front of my computer.
Okay.
I like how it like.
You can sit. You don't have to stand. So this is Dr. Yep, some of you guys know Ryan. Dr. Ryan Gagnon. You don't have to time yourself. Somebody needs to mute. Okay, sorry. He's going to talk to us about kind of selling yourself as a consultant. So he is a consultant similar to the way that I am doing research for organizations. And we were just chit-chatting today about a project with USA Climbing, and he told me that he cold called them and said, you need me to be your consultant. And so I just wanted him to talk about how that went. How did they respond to, because most of your people don't market themselves, but that's probably not going to be the case, I would imagine, for most rec therapists. I'm not sure, but yeah. So here is Ryan to talk to us shortly just about how that went and how they responded to him saying, spend money on me.
So 3 years ago, almost exactly, I called USA Climbing, the CEO of USA Climbing, after Googling it, to find out how I could get more people of color in the backcountry. I think indoor climbing is a good bridge to get people outside. And so I thought, climbing gyms are in urban centers, minority groups are in urban centers. This is a cool way for me to get people into the backcountry that I hadn't thought of. So I called up a buddy that runs climbing gyms, and he suggested, oh, there's a person you should talk to. He's the new CEO of USA Climbing. His name's Keenan Wagner. And so when I say cold call, it's probably more like warm call. So I knew about USA Climbing before I called. I went through their organizational site and figured out what they were trying to accomplish. And then I tried to figure out how I could fit my find. And so I just straight up told him, hey, Keenan, my name's Ryan. I was a mountain guide, and I want to do research on climbing on how to get more people that don't look like me into the backcountry. And then literally about 7 minutes into the call, he said, oh, I just did this massive survey with our members, and I don't know what to do with the data. So what I did first, though, is I introduced myself, and I said, this is the problem. We don't really understand why people of color don't rock climb, and I want to know why. And so I started off right away with my why, instead of what I can do for him, what Clemson's about, or any of my skill set, or any of my bona fides. That was my first and probably best decision, isn't starting with how much anything would cost or anything like that. And so I started with why. There aren't enough people of color, and that's something that everyone that's kind of in the sport of climbing kind of knows. And then I talked about some of the areas where they've had success. So I didn't just present him with, hey, this is what's wrong with you. I talked about another sport, soccer, which sounds like it would have a high Latino engagement because it does in South America, but in the US it doesn't. But they've had a really cool minority engagement effort. And so I talked about a sport organization that was having success and how a PhD student, now a professor, was able to kind of turn the needle in the right direction, and how I'd like to try that with that. And the next part that some of you won't like and some of you will understand is I was willing to work for free.
I just went through this whole spiel about how we don't work for free.
And so what I did is I demonstrated my value by going through his survey data and sharing, just a little bit of, well, what if we ask the question this way? And so some basic research methods training ahead of time helped me in that. And then what happened was he offered me a little bit of money to travel and collect data for him, like after I did my first analysis of his first time data. And that led to a little bit more money and a little bit more money. And so it's been an escalation rather than like, here's $100,000, now go do this project for me. So I developed trust from the warm call. And by warm call, I mean, I knew what I was talking about before I made the phone call, and I anticipated his reactions to whatever I had to say. So I knew what he was going to ask me before he asked it, and I thought about it a lot before I made the phone call. So what this did, though, isn't so much USA Climbing has provided me with a little bit of money and some really cool data, but it opened an enormous amount of doors for me for paid projects. Because now I have an organization in my back pocket, USA Climbing, where as long as I do good work for them, they're going to be loyal to me. And they've opened the doors for maybe a really cool project funded, and then up to 40 other similar sport organizations that want to improve, because I haven't screwed up. And so that's the other part is I don't screw up before I make the phone call, and I've rehearsed all of the outcomes before I call them up. I never randomly text or try and troubleshoot before. If there's a problem, I'll know all the questions I want to ask before I call them. So selling myself,
There's a lot of work into it.
I spent an enormous amount of time making my list of what I can do for them before I ever made the phone call.
Yeah, that's a lot of work. That's not like just like look up an organization, let's just call them real quick type of a thing. Not at all.
And getting past gatekeepers. So before I started anything, when I was an undergrad, I used to sell warranties on appliances, cold calling for a telemarketing company. So you'd buy a fridge at Sears, you would give them your information, and then I would call you and say, hey, it looks like you didn't buy the extended warranty. And I hated that job.
I hate people like you. In the best way.
Yeah. But I worked there for one summer between freshman and sophomore year, and I hated it thoroughly. But I learned to prep before the call, and the other thing is to get the rebuttals listed. And what I just am thinking about this now, I do all the rebuttal formatting before I even have the call, and that was from my training to call Sears warranty people.
So you mean like if Keenan had said, oh, this is really great, but
I had all my great buts.
Here's the reason why we can't do it. You had like an automatic response to that. So you brainstormed all these reasons why people say thanks, but no thanks.
And I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, I didn't have many rebuttals that I didn't anticipate. The only one really was, how much will this cost? And I said, well, right now, nothing. And then I told them straight up, once I prove it, it might cost a little bit more, but this will help me as a researcher and help you as an organization. And it's in my interest to be successful for you, because I won't get a job otherwise.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions for Ryan? That was just like a super impromptu guest speaker. He was in the hall in his office, and I just poked my head in and said, can you come talk to my class? So thank you.
Yeah. All right.
For being on the spot.
Go Tigers. All right. Thanks for that hat. All right. See y'all later.
See ya.
So really good example, again, can you hold the door closed behind you? Thanks. Really good example of, I think he had a really good explanation of all the work that had to go into it before he called anybody. And I know a lot of you are interviewing people who don't market themselves. That first time had to have been a warm call or a cold call type of a thing. Now, just in talking to Ryan prior to this minute in class here, he has things literally falling onto his desk because of this relationship that he has with USA Climbing, where he's having to say, I can't do all of this work type of a thing. So it only takes one really good consulting experience for it to just happen, and you don't then have, like your people, have to market yourself. So just something to keep in mind, I guess. The next portion of our, well, we're going to skip a little bit because we're taking a long time, but that's okay. The next portion of our little discussion here is about selling your services. So it's kind of, I don't know that one of the chapters had information on this about kind of reversing this initial acknowledgement. Instead of saying, hey, thanks for calling me, I'm happy to talk to you about this issue that you guys are having. It's like the reverse of that. Thank you for meeting with me so I can talk to you about your problems that you don't know that you have. Right? So you probably wouldn't explain it that way, but that's the type of conversation, how you initiate something. And it's getting that first step in the door, that first phone call, that first whatever, to have that conversation. So Charity, your guys' example of going to conferences and just, eyes open, trying to see what's out there going on, and inviting them to coffee is a brilliant way. So I don't know if you think about, after got canceled this year, so maybe you guys don't have any Some of you've never been to an ATRA, so you don't know exactly, but you could go to any session there and listen to people talk about the struggles that they're having in their facilities, and you could track them, hunt them down later on in ATRA somewhere. So if you go to any of the treatment network breakouts, which aren't necessarily sessions like a research session or anything like that, it's just all the people who work with veterans will come and meet together, and we could talk about the struggles that we're having, or the whatever, or the whatever. If you want to do consulting for veterans rec therapy, that would be a place to go and just listen, and then maybe take note and maybe sneak some pictures of people so that you can memorize their face, and then find them in the sea of people at ATRA later and said, hey, I was in the treatment session breakout for veterans, and I heard you saying this, and I think I may be able to help you with that. Do you want to go get a cup of coffee? Or whatever type of a thing. Sneaky, isn't it? Right? But seriously, this is like unto cold calling. What? Let's go to Disneyland and ride, the monorail around and have a discussion about the problems. That's right. Could you imagine, the pictures that they take while you're riding the ride on Splash Mountain and stuff like that? Me and my consultant, on Splash Mountain with our little picture. That's how we established our,
Yeah, that's the contract right there.
Yeah. He's doing thumbs up in the picture like this. That's your verbal.
Yeah, verbal confirmation.
Yeah, not verbal, but not written, but it's on paper somehow. Anyways, okay, so I think you have to be creative. If you are not going to work for an organization like Shelley, you have such a different experience with how you get your jobs. I imagine you don't have to go asking for it, right? Yeah, so it's just totally different when you have to be kind of selling yourself and searching out your jobs. And you have to get creative. And like I said, I am not a salesman. If somebody says no to me, I'll say thanks for your time and walk away. And, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but if I want to put food on my table, that's probably not a good thing either. Okay, any thoughts or questions so far? No? All right, let's merge into our next topic, which we're probably going to fly through kind of quickly. It's just such an interesting discussion. Standards of practice. Woo! You what?
Oh, I finally got my book.
Oh, yay. Your standard. So this is I think a suggested book for this class. I forgot to bring mine to class to use as an example, but let's just talk about ethics and standards of practice in general. We'll get to the actual ATRA stuff at the end of this discussion, but so what are standards of practice? Look, you can kind of sort of see the answers there. It's like a chalkboard, sort of semi-erased. All right, they're guides for conduct. They are predetermined elements of how we behave. They can establish benchmarks of some sort for how we, behave, conduct ourselves, right? Practice. Okay. What purpose do they serve? They set minimum levels, a minimum expectation. So if the standard is that you do an intake assessment within 24 hours of somebody coming into your facility, that's the minimum. If you want to do it immediately, great, but it's got to be within 24 hours. Okay. So those minimum levels by some people's standards may be not enough, and those minimum levels by other people's standards may be way high expectations. Like, we cannot do this in 24 hours. And then if you aren't able to do it, you're not meeting that minimum level, there's probably a problem, right? So to have some type of threshold of what is the bare minimum expectation. They also help assure safety. So if there is a minimum expectation and we meet that, then we've all agreed that that is an acceptable level of conduct, behavior, practice, whatever. And by acceptable, we mean it's keeping people safe and providing, Does that mean you're providing good services? I don't know about that. I mean, a minimum level doesn't always necessarily mean good. It just means that you're not neglecting people, maybe. But to the degree that you're assuring people's safety, right? All right, so what are some sources of standards of practice? They come from lots of different places. We have external standards. So these are all little terms that we're probably all very familiar with. JCO, CARF, and CMS. So CARF is the Council on Accreditation of Rehab Facilities. So some of you in long-term care probably fall under CARF, right? No, probably most of you are under JCO. Yeah. Some people maybe might be under CARF. CARF. That's a weird. CMS, I mean, all of you guys in long-term care to some degree are dealing with CMS, right? Some internal standards. Sorry, is there somebody chatting? And I can't see it because hang on. Chat. Yes, ooh, that's gonna be a good point. We'll bring that up in just a second. Oh no, go back. Okay, so some internal standards or groups that set some standards of practice. So specific then to not rec therapy necessarily, but specific to the recreation field in general. So NRPA, so what does COPERT stand for? Anybody want to take a guess? Council on
Accreditation of Parks, Recreation, Tourism.
Yes, good job. Exactly. COPART, that's what everybody calls it, COPART. So, community parks and rec organizations are accredited under COPART through NRPA under COPART. And so that establishes some minimum level of expectation for how you provide community rec services. Okay, so ATRA, we have kind of two elements here when it comes to our standards or organizations that provide standards of practice. KHEP, does anybody want to take a guess at KHEP? I looked it up earlier, now I can't remember. It's like the Council for the Accreditation, something, health, education programs, something. Allied health, yeah. So this is establishing standards for the education of health professionals. So this is not so much like the practice for like practice standards. This is more education standards. So you need to have, and that's the same thing for CART, so Council on Accreditation for Rec Therapy Education. So these are setting the standards of what degree programs need to be teaching to their students in order for them to, have the competency to go out and do the job. So ATRA isn't establishing the standards, but CART is, and CART is, I don't think CART is under ATRA. It's a separate entity from ATRA, but there's a lot of weird blending because there are people in ATRA on the board and such who are also on the board of CART. So weird blending, but it's rec therapy specific, whereas like KHEP is not. So internal, external, when NTRS was around, they had some standards as well, but doesn't exist anymore. So these external standards of practice, these external sources, there's some challenges with them. They can be restrictive in the sense that they don't always meet the needs of everybody represented. So if we're looking at, JCO or CARF or even CMS, like is rec therapy listed in any of the standards there by name? We know not really in CMS. I don't think in CARF. JCO does have some rec therapy specific language, which is great. But if it doesn't, then there's no, well, this goes to the other factor here, that RT is absent, then how do you know what the standards are that you operate under? If you are, for example, all of the long-term care people who know, Shelley provided the example of when JCO comes in and they have to do an audit, right? So if you work in a facility that is being covered by JCO, but there's nothing specific to you and your practice, how do you get any guidance? Because standards of practice can provide guidance to how you practice. You're just kind of out there in limbo world, right? Where there's not any real information for you, but you're kind of covered by something. So, you know, they all have their benefits and drawbacks. Internal standards, they can relate to professional preparation. So again, the educational level degree program, competence and professional practice. So they can relate to specific skills that you need to have. So this, trying to think of some examples. Well, I mean, CART addresses some of the competence side of things as well, even though it's more about the professional prep, but CART wouldn't go into any facility and do any type of an audit of practice. I don't know if there are any organizations that go into RT facilities and do audits on practice other than internal groups doing their own work. And so I'm going to carry that conversation on in just a minute. So going along more with internal standards of practice, there's some kind of critical issues with it. It's largely voluntary. So we have our standards of practice in ATRA, but is there anybody who enforces them? Do we know? How many of you practitioners have a copy of the standards of practice in your facility? I see some thumbs up. Only 2. Raise your hand. 3. Oh man, guys. 4. Whitney. 4 out of 14 people in our class, 13 people in our class who are practicing-ish, sort of. You guys don't count. But that's not very many. So it's largely voluntary. So if you guys want to function within the guidelines of the standards of practice, that's on you to enforce that. I'm not sure if there's an enforcement arm there. Does our professional organization enforce? Does ATRA enforce the standards of practice on facilities? Mm-mm. So there is a potential issue with representation in who puts these standards of practice out. So when we had NTRS and in addition to ATRA, you guys know that there was a second professional organization, right? Once in a blue moon. That blue moon was not so long ago. It was in 2010 when it was disbanded. So we had, I know, not so long. Oh, 7 years. I said 5 almost. It's been more than that. So in 2010, they were disbanded. But before that, we had 2 professional organizations. Philosophically, kind of our field was split, and still is split someday. We're not going to go down that road of discussion. All right. But you could exist in one of these organizations, but there was a set of standards of practice put out by ATRA, but did those standards of practice really align with how the people who ascribe to the NTRS philosophy? Did it fit there? Probably not. So it didn't represent their practice very well, and they didn't want to follow those guidelines. And so again, going back to that voluntary issue, if not everybody's using it, then I don't know, why have it? So the efficacy piece, there is also not a ton or hardly any research out there that says that standards of practice help improve practice. And so there's just not any knowledge about whether or not it really makes a difference. So why have them? What do you guys think? Why have standards of practice? You guys should, just coming out of management where we talked about standards of practice, didn't we? I think we did. We used it in developing that written plan of operation, right? That whole thing. But if there's nobody to enforce it, Elizabeth, your face right now says, I have no idea what she's talking about. I don't remember
I just can't sit still.
all those lectures. Sounded like somebody was online was saying something.
Yeah, I work for a municipality, and we're under NRPA CAPRA accreditation, which is similar to the academic, the COA PRT. But it's every 5 years we have to file through and do an internal audit, and it's a really big it's a big paperwork. A committee gets together and we go through it, and then we submit it, but we actually have to go through, and I guess it's the integrity of the organization going through it as well, but going through all of our SOPs and linking them to that document. And then it's a back and forth. We send it back to NRPA and they go through it, and then it comes back to us. So there seems to be some checks and balances, and I think everybody wants to make sure they're actually practicing. We also hired an external company to come in just to make sure, and that's every 10 years. So every 2 audits, we have an external company come in just to make sure that we're not skewing it at all when we're going through it.
I think NRPA does a good job of, they seem to have, I don't know how bad the bite is in terms of the enforcement element there, but if you didn't go through those audits, if you didn't do it, what would the repercussions be?
We would lose our accreditation, but we would have a filing period. So if we needed more time, we'd just be suspended until we could get ourselves together.
But would you guys close down?
No, not at all. We just don't get to say that we're accredited.
Exactly. So some people, that really matters to say we're an accredited program type of a thing. Other people don't care, right? So I think NRPA has, in terms of like community organizations who want to say we're an NRPA accredited organization, which means we meet this minimum level of standard for quality services. There isn't, in terms of like RT facilities, practice facilities, not education programs, but practice facilities, there isn't, as far as I'm aware, an equal type of process where if we're not accredited by somebody, then we're not an accredited RT facility. Well, what does that really mean? I don't care. I'm still going to send my dad to that long-term care facility. I don't care about the RT piece. There's just no component there for that.
It does make it easier for funding. I will say that. And we manage our sign language interpreter contracts and things like that, and third-party billing. So on the RT end, having some sort of standard there that we can point to and say, hey, we do have some sort of checks and balances, somebody checking in on us to make sure.
Well, so this is where having something like JCO in place of an RT specific accreditation, this is where we still have those checks, an organization in place to put those standards there to say, yeah, we're still a good quality program, even though it's not specific to RT. So this is where, I don't know what the details are, but there are some elements in the JCO standards that address RT specifically, and so that's good. That helps give us a little bit more, guidance in what we do. But in the other standards where there isn't stuff specific to RT, at least we're still covered by something, right? But yeah, we have very few RT or any at all RT specific accreditation mechanisms for practice, which means our standards are based on our voluntary standards from ATRA, and then whatever standards are in place by something like JCO or CARF or CMS, which isn't nothing, I will say. It just can get muddy. So I wish that I would have remembered to bring my standards of practice with me, but and I'm going to mess this part up, and because I have to read my notes on this, but the standards of practice, there are some ways that you can use it to like audit what your facilities are doing, and it looks at kind of 3 elements of your services: the structure, the process, and the outcome. and I apologize, but I have to read the notes down here because I can never remember, keep these 3 pieces straight. Okay, so structure indicators relate to factors that must be present in order to provide a service. So environmental, facilities, resources, proper staffing, correct use of equipment, and adherence to policies. Process elements describe the nature of the interaction between the client and the therapist and are represented by the use of practice guidelines and appropriate assessment and documentation techniques. So looking at the practitioner-client interaction, activities constituting care, etc. So if I want to look at the process of how you provide your services, I could, look at these elements, and again, it's this three-pronged approach to evaluating our services. And then the outcome measures the effects of intervention and would be presented by achievement or non-achievement of client goals. So surveyors with external accreditation bodies like JCO review continuous quality plans for identified health indicators. So because professional standards of practice are organized according to these indicators, they assist with therapists in assessing continuous quality care. So again, this relates just to the outcomes of our services. If you open up the standards of practice and look in them, they're arranged in this structure, process, outcome way so that it's really easy to evaluate these elements of your programs with regards to all the standards. So I'm trying to fly through the end of this really quick, guys, because I know it's been a long day for everyone. We have 12 standards, in case you weren't sure about that. 12 standards in the ACTRA standards of practice. 1 through 5 here kind of align with our APIDE, add the D on there, APIDE process, discharge and planning. I do encourage you to go look through the notebook, the standards of practice notebook, and kind of see how this is all structured in there. There's elements here to ethical conduct, written plan of operation. Do you have that master manual of how your facility operates? And now that you guys have created one, that should be clear. Some staff qualifications. There's a continuous quality element that can be audited, a resource management, and then this research element too. So there are audits for all of these. So you can do kind of like a self-assessment based on the standards of practice and determine whether or not your facility is meeting those basic minimum level elements of practice. As a consultant, you can go in and implement those audits on facilities to help determine whether or not people are practicing at that minimum level. You guys all right over there? What's going on? Okay. So how can you use the standards of practice? I just explain some of that. So here are the self-assessments that as your own practitioner, you can do these, but as a consultant, you can also implement these as part of your consulting services. If people, I don't know that a lot of people know how to implement the self-audits out of the standards of practice. And so if you wanted to bill yourself as the rec therapist consultant who can, implement the audits to help you be up to snuff, up to the standards of practice, maybe that would be a really good service. I'm not really sure, but you could do that. Let's see what else. Okay, so that's the end of the standards of practice. I don't love talking about the standards of practice, guys, so thank you for bearing with me as we got through that. I'll post these PowerPoints and you guys can read the notes in there and find out more about it. But let's talk about ethics really quick. You guys all had to take that quiz a couple of weeks ago. I hope you remember what your outcome was on that. What is your ethical leanings? Do you lean towards justice or do you lean towards care? An ethic of care. I want everybody to share because I want this to just be like our last little 10-minute conversation here, because I think this is important to know where you are and where you exist, because as you're doing your consulting projects, it would be good to know whether you are a person of justice or a person of care.
I have justice.
Okay, wait. Janelle, justice. Justice for Tara. Whoa, justice. I was justice. Yeah, put it into the chat. Justin. Yay, Elizabeth, Care, and Natalie. I thought it was funny when it was explaining it on there that more women, or maybe it didn't explain that on there. It's in my notes down here. Hang on. Hello, come back. All right, so ethic of justice based on abstract impersonal principles like justice, fairness, equality, or authority. These people tend to place a lot of weight on moral principle, laws, or policies which they believe would be applied to everyone equally. The advantage of this approach is that it looks at a problem logically and impartially. You may lose sight of the immediate interests of particular individuals, and it's more common for men than women. So interesting that almost all of us identified with the justice piece. Yes, so thank you, the ethic of care side of people. You guys are like the warm fuzzies. This is founded on a sense of responsibility to reduce actual harm or suffering. People who believe this way believe that people are the focus of the ethical dilemma and the particular circumstances of the case. The advantage is that this is responsive to immediate suffering and harm. This approach is flexible, caring, and subjective, which makes the justice part seem like cold, harsh, and uncaring. Right? However, sometimes people with this orientation lose sight of the forest for the trees, more reflective of women and people who define themselves in terms of their relationships with others. I don't know. What did you guys think? Were any of you surprised by all of you getting justice, or surprised by getting one or the other? Okay.
Tracy.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just seeing Tracy's comments in the chat. Do you want to talk about it a little bit? Wait, is she there? Oh yeah, there you are. Other than your one sentence there, Tracy, do you want to comment?
No, I was just surprised that I got justice because I'm more of the warm and fuzzy person, and I don't do more of the justice part where it's strict and blah blah blah. So I was just really surprised. I took it again to make sure I answered the questions right, and I still came up with justice. So I was just, it threw me off.
Yeah, all the typos in the questions. Thanks for bearing through that. Okay.
And I think maybe like if I wonder if taking it through time, does that make sense? If I get one time, I take it now and then maybe years later, or if I took it before, if that changes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, out of curiosity, what were your character strengths that we talked about? You remember last time? I wonder.
I do. That's it too. So if you do what my characteristics last, it was kindness, honesty, and fairness, love, and forgiveness. Those were my top ones.
Kindness, honesty, fairness, love, and forgiveness. So it seems like 3 out of those align with the ethic of care, and 2 align with the justice.
I know. It was just threw me off. And I talked about it with somebody else that took the test. The consultant I work with, and she goes, "That's not you." That was really
there might be some issues with our quiz. I will say it was kind of like random, the most random quiz ever.
It's just interesting.
Yeah, something to think about. Anybody else want to share? Okay.
I kind of wanted to know what percentage I guess I was of more so justice than care, because I'm kind of like with you, a feeling that I have the personality and kind of the drive of a caring heart, I guess. But I guess I do remember that one of my top ones was spirituality, and that's kind of a structure of morals. So I don't know. I mean, you can also be like a just person and do it in a caring way. So
yeah, that's the other thing. Like,
these little definitions made it seem really black and white, that you are like rah about everything and I don't care about you, and I know that sometimes as a teacher, my students kind of think that I don't care about like their life problems. Interesting that I had you guys as undergrads, and it's probably a different experience as a graduate student and having me as a teacher as a grad student. But I have gotten this a lot as I've been a teacher, that just don't care about all this other stuff going on in my life, and to some degree I don't. But I realize life happens and crap happens, right? So I feel like it's all a negotiation. Okay, grades are not negotiable, assignments are not negotiable, but how we work through these, it's all kind of a negotiation. I am not going to just be like, I don't care, and just this is it, and it's due this day without any due dates are important, though I don't accept labor. So do you see how there's this weird like gray area between? I feel like there's a gray area there. Is anybody really all just justice and all just care? I don't actually think so. I think we overlap between both, but we just tend to lean one way or the other. That's just my personal opinion on it. Whitney, I think it's interesting. Again, maybe it's just like where your background is, but if you have a lot of experience working in, for example, like the criminal justice system, it would make sense that it'd be just out of the need for rigidity and stuff like that, that it would not be so much like the warm, fuzzy, come on over here and talk to me about your problems as we're sitting in the penitentiary or whatever. As a therapist, obviously, we put our therapist hat on and we have that therapeutic relationship with people, so we do that. But yeah, so the point, I guess, of taking that quiz is just for us to be further aware of how we lean towards things, where our strengths are, where our weaknesses are, or areas for improvement. I don't like calling them weaknesses necessarily. As we kind of march down this road towards establishing these working relationships with people, which is very different than the therapeutic relationship that we have with our clients. I mean, there's some similarities, but it is different to a certain degree. I think that's going to be it for this, unless you guys have any questions about ethics or contracting or anything. So the MOAs, how are they going? I hope you guys have started putting them together and that it's not like Monday next week you're going to start writing it.
I'm waiting on a hard yes from my person, and it's kind of sticky, especially with after being canceled and the hurricane and stuff like in Alabama and whatnot. So I don't want to pull teeth, but I may have to start pulling teeth.
Yeah. So there is some element already where you've had some of these initial meetings, the contracting meetings, right, where you've had these discussions with people about what the deliverables. I hope these discussions have already happened, about what these deliverables are going to be, what the expectation is on you and on them, right? Already happening? Yeah. Okay. I will provide feedback, and so I feel like this isn't like a final draft. I expect it to be a complete draft, but it doesn't have to be perfect at this stage. So if there are still things that need to be worked out, say this is the plan, I'm waiting on confirmation, of those types of things, but largely it needs to be done. And I'm happy to look through them. If you're just stuck on something and you need help before next week, be like, but not on Monday. Okay, so if that's it, no other questions or thoughts or comments, way to go, contracting and ethics, and have a fantastic night, and I will see you guys, some of you tomorrow, some of you next week. Bye, everybody.